Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack a genuinely fascinating medical case study. Today, we're putting on our detective hats to see why looking at an isolated LDL cholesterol number might not be telling the whole story of your metabolic health. Seriously, have you ever wondered if the standard lipid panel your doctor orders is really giving you the full picture? Well, the data we're about to explore might completely change how you view your next blood test.
Okay, let's just quickly look at our roadmap for today. We're covering 1. Shifts in lipid markers. 2. Elite metabolic phenotypes. 3. Resolving inflammation and insulin. 4. Pushing into deep ketosis. 5. The lipid energy model. And finally, 6. The argument against statins. We'll be moving straight from historical lab results right up to real-time ketosis tracking.
Starting off with Section 1, Shifts in Lipid Markers, a case study from Jan to March 2026. Let's kick off our investigation by looking at a pretty dramatic transformation in standard cardiovascular risk markers that happened over just a 2-month period.
Now, what's wild about this data is the sheer magnitude of the changes in such a short time frame. Notice that massive 70% drop in triglycerides? They absolutely plummeted from 1.63 down to 0.49. And look at the VLDL, that's the very low-density lipoprotein, falling by a staggering 69%. That indicates a significantly lower particle burden. Plus, we've got the classic LDL dropping by 27% to a normalized 2.77. So what we're really seeing here is a system rapidly transitioning into highly efficient fat oxidation. Moving right along to Section 2, Elite Metabolic Phenotypes, Understanding the Ratios. Let's see how this builds into what researchers actually consider an elite metabolic state. This single number right here, 0.32, is the patient's new triglyceride to HDL ratio. It dropped a massive 68% from a January baseline. You know, in modern metabolic analysis, this is kind of the ultimate metric for efficiency. It places this person firmly in an elite metabolic phenotype category, meaning they've got incredibly efficient fat utilization and a super low burden of those risky, small, dense LDL particles.
Seeing those crazy high-efficiency fat-burning markers, you'd probably assume this patient perfectly fits that trendy low-carb profile researchers call the lean mass hyperresponder, or LMHR triad. That classic pattern requires LDL soaring over 200, HDL pushing over 80, and triglycerides dropping below 70.
But here's the twist in our case study. This patient actually doesn't meet the LMHR criteria. You see, while the lean mass hyperresponder pattern famously features a rising LDL in response to a low-carb state, this patient's LDL successfully normalized and went down. It literally went in the exact opposite direction. And according to the analysis, this divergence is absolutely a highly favorable sign. So, on to Section 3, Resolving Inflammation and Insulin Beyond Cholesterol. To really get what's going on with this patient's health, we have to look past the cholesterol entirely. Just look at these staggering improvements. The patient's HOMA-IR, which measures insulin resistance, crashed by 64%, down to 0.86. Their fasting insulin tracked exactly with it, also dropping 64%. And crucial for cardiovascular health, their highly sensitive CRP fell 61% to a practically non-existent 0.39. These massive drops prove the patient has become fully insulin sensitive with minimal vascular inflammation. That is huge. And the systemic benefits extend way beyond the vascular system. We're seeing a concurrent 28% rise in testosterone paired with a 17% drop in PSA. This is super important because it strongly supports using a root-cause dietary approach for resolving issues like an enlarged prostate, rather than just jumping straight to heavy pharmaceutical interventions. All right, Section 4, Pushing into Deep Ketosis, Real-Time Data from April. Now we're going to shift gears from those historical March lab results to late April 2026 to introduce a really fascinating real-time variable. Check out this real-time breath ketone meter reading. That peak of 9.72 parts per million isn't just some random number. It tells us the patient is in a state of moderate to deep nutritional ketosis.
What's really remarkable here is the speed. On April 23rd, they were at a flat 0, not in ketosis at all. Just 3 days later, they hit that peak of 9.72. In almost no time, they transitioned into their deepest documented ketosis period on record, which is roughly equivalent to 1.0 to 2.0 millimoles per liter of blood BHB.
Which brings us to Section 5, the lipid energy model, reframing the data. The big question now is how this state of deep ketosis is going to impact any future lab results.
This introduces us to Dave Feldman's lipid energy model, which totally reframes how we look at circulating cholesterol.
It predicts that when a lean, healthy body enters deep ketosis, it needs to move a whole lot of fat around for energy, right? So VLDL and LDL particles are basically recruited to act as fuel transport vehicles. Think of them like cargo ships in the bloodstream. Because of this, if blood is drawn during a peak in ketosis, the model predicts their LDL will actually rise above their previous baseline.
As the analysis perfectly puts it, in the context of your trig/HDL of 0.32, HSCRP of 0.39, and HOMA-IR of 0.86, this is a fuel mobilization signal, not a cardiovascular risk signal. An expected spike in LDL right now isn't a sign of sudden disease. The cargo ships are just out making deliveries.
And that brings us to Section 6, the argument against statins, the constellation of markers. Let's directly challenge the traditional reflex to prescribe statins based on isolated markers alone.
In a ketogenic or carnivore context, looking at LDL in total isolation is just an inadequate risk metric. Look at this entire constellation of markers: profound insulin sensitivity, minimal vascular inflammation, very low atherogenic particle burden, and historically, an LDL that trended down without any meds. When a cardiologist just looks at absolute LDL in a vacuum, they entirely miss this incredibly healthy picture that effectively argues against the need for statins.
Now, if you're as fascinated by this dynamic as I am, you've definitely got to check out the Cholesterol Code documentary on Amazon Prime. It dives super deep into Dave Feldman's research and shows exactly how these low-carb contexts are totally redefining our understanding of lipids.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought for today's explainer. Are we treating actual metabolic disease, or are we simply misinterpreting the lab data of a highly efficient, fuel-mobilizing state? When you or your doctor look at your next lipid panel, will you demand to see the whole metabolic picture, or will you let a single, isolated number dictate your health? Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.